right, we are ready to begin.
Hello, my name is Scott Spence. I am Lacey City Manager, and I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's virtual community forum to introduce our 4 finalists for Lacey's next Chief of Police. To get to this stage of the hiring process, the city enlisted the help of Public Sector Search and Consulting, a leader in the recruitment of police executives. This firm conducted an extensive nationwide search for candidates on the city's behalf. Tonight's forum is intended to provide an opportunity for you to meet the candidates virtually for Lacey's next police chief, as well as to learn more about the finalists that we've selected. I'd like to introduce Gary Peterson, the CEO of Public Sector Search and Consulting. Gary will introduce our 4 finalists and direct questions that will be asked of each candidate. So can we bring in Gary for the virtual meeting?
Thank you, Scott. Good evening. And I also want to welcome everyone to tonight's virtual community forum. The format for the forum will be as follows. Each candidate will have an opportunity to take 4 or 5 minutes to introduce themselves. Then I will ask the candidates the same 5 questions. We'll rotate the order, so each candidate has an opportunity to go first, second, and third, and so on. Candidates will have 4 minutes per question. I'll provide a gentle reminder if they get to the 3-minute mark and to wrap it up. At the conclusion of the forum, I'll turn it back over to your city manager, Scott Spence. Your candidates for this evening are Robert Almeida, the interim police chief for Lacey; Jason Bullhorst, police captain with Newport News, Virginia; Sean Case, a police captain with Anchorage, Alaska, PD; and John Pate, the city manager and public safety director for Opelika, Florida. With that having been said, we're going to start with self-introductions in alphabetical order. We're going to start with Robert Almeida.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It looks like we have about 40 folks joining us so far. Hopefully more to join soon. My name is Robert Almada. I am serving as the interim chief of police for the city of Lacey. I joined the Lacey Police Department in October of 2019 as the deputy chief of police and served in that role until Chief Semko retired medically. Then I was asked to come on board as the interim chief of police beginning May 1st of 2020. The last 14 months, we've navigated COVID together and kept the police department moving and succeeding. We've worked on restaffing the department and frankly, brought us to this point today to we can find a permanent chief of police for our department and keep moving forward. I began my law enforcement career back in 1990 with the Santa Monica Police Department in Southern California as a police cadet, working my way through college. After that program, I became a police officer, then a sergeant for about 17 years. I was a sergeant, rounded through all the different details at the Santa Monica Police Department, working investigations, working undercover details, administrative details, and so on. And then I promoted to the rank of lieutenant around 2012, served as a patrol watch commander. Then I had the opportunity to become an emergency manager for the city of Santa Monica. I served in that role for about 3 years. During that time, I experienced several different emergencies, which helped prepare me for the COVID pandemic. At the completion of my time as emergency manager of Santa Monica, I returned to the police department and began that role as an event manager and working in public relations. After finishing that role, became a return patrol for a short period of time, and then became a captain of police in charge of the operations division, which is patrol, as you would imagine, and other field assignments. I did that for approximately 2 years, then became the captain in charge of special operations, including SWAT, parking, and a variety of other details. As I said, then I joined the Lacey Police Department in October 2019. In my time here at Lacey, I've experienced many things, got to meet a lot of great people, and I've never been so beloved, frankly, as a police officer. It is a special community, and it's to be valued. I am very appreciative to Scott Spence for giving me the opportunity to serve as the interim chief of police, and I certainly thank the community for that opportunity as well. And I look forward to this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Next up, Jason Bullhorst, Please tell the community of Lacey about yourself.
Hi, good evening and welcome tonight. My name is Jason Ballhorst. I'm from Newport News, Virginia. I've started my law enforcement career approximately 26 years ago here in Newport News, Virginia. The community here, we have about 195,000 people in the city. We have 440 sworn police officers. When I started my career, obviously in patrol, I worked my way through a variety of assignments. I rode a bicycle for several years, enjoyed that. I was a field training officer for 1 year and then became a detective. I served in narcotics, our intelligence unit. I was also an operator with our SWAT team. Was promoted after 8 years as a sergeant. Again, went back to patrol, had a variety of assignments to include, again, investigations, narcotics, was a SWAT team leader, and was promoted to lieutenant. Served back in patrol on midnights for a few years. Built some team skills with the guys on midnight shift. Developed a team looking at specific problems that we had to deal with in the precinct within the late hours, trying to keep the officers engaged and motivated to make a difference, even with the challenge of the midnight hours. Went on to be promoted to a lieutenant, or I'm sorry, get transferred to a assignment with our SWAT team again as a commander, and then also into a detective assignment with narcotics again, and also with our task force settings. I worked with a variety of the federal agencies in the task force arena, worked with the FBI, DEA, the HIDA group, as well as the Assistant U.S. Attorney's Office in our district. Put on several federal cases with a team that we had built with 12 task force officers engaged in all kinds of gang activity, career criminal enterprises, and we had several RICO cases we established. And we had 3 cases that led the nation during that duration of time. Ultimately, I was promoted to captain. I served as a captain for the last 6 years. I held 3 different assignments. First off, I went to our professional standards division, where I had the internal affairs section, as well as the training division. Internal affairs, I had a lieutenant and 3 sergeants working, where we handled all internal matters, dealing with use of force, any problems with our personnel related to citizen complaints or any other issues internally. Also with the training section, I had the city's training academy. We train from within. We have average about 2 training classes per year, usually between 15 and 20 recruits would go through our academy. So I had the training staff working on that, as well as internal training. So we had our in-service and a variety of other trainings that we put on internally throughout the year. I went to one of the 3 precincts after 2 years in professional standards. And I went to our South precinct, which was one of our more challenging precincts. We had a lot of crime, most of it with violence. We had a lot of gang activity in that precinct. So I led that team and combating and really focusing on specific issues within the community, dealing with violent crime and other problems that the community identified with quality of life issues. I currently am serving in our Special Investigations Division, which drew me back to the narcotics section again. There I'm putting together a real-time crime center, leveraging a lot of technology into active investigations and just utilizing more technology to strengthen our skills and abilities within law enforcement to deal with the problems that we see in the public and within the community.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. Next up, Sean Case. Please tell Lacey about yourself.
I'll tell you, I'm real excited to be here today. I want to thank all the people that have logged on to watch this. You know, it's important that the community is involved in such an important decision for the city of Lacey. And it's really one of the things that attracted me to apply for this job. It's a great environment. It's not just the environment that's obvious with the eyes when you show up and you see a beautiful community, great trees, access to lakes and hiking and trails. Coming from Alaska, we love the outdoors and we love those sorts of things. But we have a supportive council. We have a very supportive community in Lacey, and it's a department that has a great foundation. The structure of the department, the things that Lacey Police Department has been involved in, is a foundation that is certainly on the right track as we move forward in law enforcement. And I think we all know there are challenges for us in the future, and that's an environment that I want to work in. First, let me tell you about the important things about me. I'm married to Nora. I have a 14-year-old daughter named Malia. I have a 17-year-old son named Dylan. My family is really, really important to me. And, being in a community for most of my life here in Anchorage, I've lived in Anchorage, I've worked in Anchorage, went to school in Anchorage, my kids go to school in Anchorage, and moving to a community where that same thing can happen, where you're actually a part of that community, where I'm going to see community members at the grocery store and have the opportunity to interact and engage with them. And that's important to me. Throughout my law enforcement career, there's a lot of things that I've had the great opportunity to do. I've been very blessed in my career. A lot of fun assignments. Patrol was one of the assignments I was the most passionate about, but a field supervisor, K9, SWAT, SRO, these are all exciting assignments that I got to do and serve the community. As a commander, I've been a shift commander. I've also done some things that aren't on the exciting side of law enforcement, policy development. I've been involved in internal affairs as an investigator and overseeing internal affairs, and as a captain of patrol division, captain of administration. So a lot of great opportunities. I've been heavily involved in training with my police department and very fortunate throughout the country. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining in, and I look forward to meeting everybody in the future.
Thanks, Sean. Next up, John Pate. Please tell Lacey about yourself.
Thank you, Gary. My name is John Pate. I am born and raised from the city of Chicago, in one of not the best areas of Chicago. I came into law enforcement over 15 years ago today, and I've held almost every rank in law enforcement, starting as a police officer, police corporal, police sergeant, police lieutenant for the village of Phoenix Police Department, which is located in Chicago, Illinois, South Suburban Chicago, Illinois. And within that role, I worked in patrol, I worked in administration, I worked in training, I worked in professional development, as well as professional compliance. From there, I went to the Cook County Sheriff's Office, which is the second largest sheriff's office in the country. It's about 5.15 million residents, and the city of Chicago is encompassed by the county of Cook. And I worked in the reform efforts within the Cook County Sheriff's Department while this department was under federal consent decree for excessive force related issues. I worked in the Internal Affairs Division, both as an investigator and a supervisor. I worked in the Audit and Inspection Unit, which does compliance reviews based on policy and procedures within the Sheriff's Office, both within the Police Department, Corrections and Court Services divisions of the Cook County Sheriff's Office. I was promoted to the rank of Police Inspector and Deputy Director within the Audit and Inspection, as well as the Inspector General units within the Cook County Sheriff's Office. I left there, became a chief of police at the village of University Park, Illinois, which I held the role a little over 2 years before being promoted to city manager and director of public safety. City manager, of course, explains itself what that role encompasses. But what was very unique to me as director of public safety of the Village University Park is I oversee police and fire operations directly. I had a deputy police chief reporting to me and a deputy fire chief reporting to me. Really still being in charge of the public safety effort, both in police and fire. I left there went to the city of Opelika, Florida, where I'm the city manager and director of public safety there. Really focused on a lot of reform-related areas within the city, and taking the city to a huge and significant place that it is in currently, as well as personally overseeing police operations there for 8 months while we were in a search for a new chief of police. I truly and most sincerely look forward to being involved in this process, in that I feel that I have a lot of the experiences that are needed to take Lacey to the next level, in that I feel that I have the abilities as well as the academic skill set to take the city forward. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Hey, real quick, I want to point out your internet's kind of in and out. So I don't know if anyone else was getting that with John, but I was. So we're going to go to our prepared questions. And the first question, we're going to start out with Jason Bullhorst. So Jason, assuming you're selected as the next police chief for the city of Lacey, what does the first 6 months look like? And what would success look like to you?
Well, this first 6 months, obviously getting there and getting adjusted to the new environment, the culture of the agency and the community, getting to learn and build relationships with everybody, internally, externally, with the other department heads within the city, and just building relationships. One of my first missions or outlined plan with the Lacey Police Department specifically would be to assess the established leadership, get to know the executive staff, the command staff, the leadership within the agency at the supervisory level and within the officers, the informal leaders in the agency. The strength comes from the roots, which are the patrol officers, the detectives out there doing the work daily, finding out what their leadership skills are, finding a direction with where they want to go, and just making sure we have coaching and mentoring in place for the future of those officers and detectives, future supervisors, and the first line supervisors to build a progression and succession plan. Secondly, I'd look at the communication. How are we internally and externally communicating? Are we building the relationships both inside and outside the agency and with the other departments of the city to effectively serve the community? Also, externally meeting with the civic leaders, the community as a whole, and the community leadership, the church organizations, and all other entities that are out there that we serve. Having an open door policy, not only with the employees, but as well with the community. We are available to the community, and I need to be very transparent. I need to be available and be able to engage in conversations to discuss or find out or identify any opportunities for improvement. Third, I would look at the training, look at the policies, the standards. What has Lacey been doing? What's been working? What areas can we improve on? Or where are some other opportunities for growth? I'd look at the different facilities for training, look at any opportunities for improvement, any other ideas that are out there. It sounds like the officers that come on board with Lacey are diverse. They're all from all over the nation. I've seen that we have some recruits that are from out here in Virginia as well. So looking at the diversity within the organization itself will give us some opportunities to discuss different ideas, different philosophies, and ways that we can impact the community and better serve them. I also want to meet with the police union, get in touch with their representatives, build a relationship, get a formal understanding of what our expectations are. Obviously, we both want the best for not only the police department, but the community we serve and the officers. So just get on the same page, have open, honest discussions, and listen to any concerns that might be there. Finally, I'd like to just build internal relationships and start forming a cohesive partnership with the executive staff and the command staff and the supervisors within the organization. Accountability is one of the biggest issues facing law enforcement at whole. And I just want to set the standard on what, under as the chief of police, what I expect for accountability. And that's, we are guided by integrity. That's key. And that just making sure that everybody understands the standards and that we all have to hold each other accountable. So in the first 6 months, it's just building those relationships, open lines of communication internally and externally, and having a clear guide of where we're going as an agency, what the mission is, and how we're going to get there. Have just a GPS course set out, and leadership matters. We all have to be leaders at some point, no matter where we're at, whether you're the chief, captain, lieutenant, a sergeant, or even a police officer out on a critical incident. We're all leaders, and we all have to have the ability to step up and be that. So making sure we have training available internally to promote and provide guidance for our future leadership.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Sean Case, you're next up. Assuming you're selected as the next police chief, what does your first 6 months look like? And what would success look like to you?
I think it starts with relationship building and also a path forward. Coming from outside, not living in the community, and not knowing the department inside and out, it's building that relationship not only with the officers and employees within the police department, with the employees throughout the city, with the directors from the other divisions within the city, community, and going out to the community, not having the expectation that the community is going to join in and come and find me, but I'm actually going to go out and seek the input and opinions and observations of the community. That relationship building is absolutely critical. Being able to have open and honest conversations about all things that have to do with the City of Lacey, not just the department, is really important to me. And once you start building that foundation and you start having those good quality conversations, then you need to look at all the resources that you have, the talent that you have within the agency, technology, the course that the department's been on, and the course that was already set for the department. You don't want to come into a new department and just completely wipe out things or try to wipe out things that are just getting started or things that the city's been thinking about. You got to come and look at that and contribute where you can. What's also really nice about coming in a brand new department is, I've got no opinions or expectations of the employees within the police department. I get to come and meet them and see what they bring to the table and really make use of those talents. And then you also want to introduce not only the command staff, but the entire department of kind of what's the philosophy, what's the vision you're going to be going under, that you want the direction to move towards, kind of that real general outline of a vision. And what is the leadership philosophy? How do you want to interact with the employees, and how do you want the entire department and the employees within the Lacey Police Department to interact with the community? And once we've done a full assessment, once we've seen what we have, once we, kind of analyze the value that we have, then we want to set the course. And you want to get that written down. You want to make sure that the community and the bosses and council know what you want to try to accomplish, right? That's the accountability piece for the work you put in for the first 60 days. And I think there's two ways that we can assess whether or not it's successful. The first way, and the most important way, if I like relationship building, that means I want to be able to sit down with other leadership within the city. I want to be able to sit down with line level employees, and I want to hear feedback. You'll be able to tell if you've built that relationship when you have an employee look at you and go, Chief, I think you're a little off on that one. And you've created that environment where you can have that give and take relationship, right? That open communication, particularly when someone's coming in from the outside. So it's one way you could measure it. The second thing is as I mentioned before, I want to produce something that we can hand over within the first 6 months that says, this is the course that we're taking, and this is how we're going to get there, and then get buy-in and support from not only the department, but the community, and then also the other areas of the city. Because, from everything I can tell, it looks like we've got a good team environment within the different sections of the city. And this isn't just a course that's for the police department. It's a course for the entire city of Lacey.
Thanks, Sean. John Pate, assuming you're selected as the next chief, what does your first 6 months look like? And what does success look like for you?
Yes, my first 6 months within the agency looks like really meeting with the key stakeholders of the community, both the business side of the community as well as our resident side of the community, to understand what their concerns are in regards to policing in general, as well as interacting with my line staff, as well as the rank and file and the command staff of the Lacey Police Department. Really getting an understanding of the agency, where it's going, what we're looking at to kind of leverage in the next 2, 3, 5 year period of time frame. And from there, really develop a strong strategic plan that is built on input from the rank and file. Like I said, within the police department, it's built on our businesses within the city, that's built within from our residents, as well as really even digging a little bit deeper into it, where we're doing anonymous surveys of police department staff and city staff in regards to what their thought process is of the operations of their law enforcement agency, putting surveys out there that are confidential in nature to our residents and business owners to kind of understand that side of things, as well as really create a consensus building moment where the rank and file really trusts me as their chief of police. I am a chief that I believe in leading by example. I want to be out in the streets with my guys. I want to know what's going on. I want to hear what their concerns are. And I also want to understand where they want to take the agency to, which is not always the case, right? A new chief comes in, they really look at what input that they're getting, but they really don't understand the thought process of their rank and file. And unless they're put in a place to be able to provide feedback in an anonymous nature, you're really not going to gauge where a law enforcement agency is. And I think that is so much essential. Well, also what I want to do is have special workshops with the community and our business owners from different parts of the city. And I want to do that on a monthly basis coming in, where I'm literally hosting meetings from our stakeholders, and I'm hearing what they say as far as where they want to see their police department go, which I feel is a huge benefit to everybody involved. We have to reimagine policing in this day and age. And reimagining policing, we need to understand where we're at to know where we gotta go. And I am, for one, somebody that truly understands that. Just based on my life experiences and just based on everything that I know that I am accustomed to dealing with as a law enforcement executive and as a city manager, really, and as I really can kind of pinpoint those things because I've sat on both sides of the room. And so I think that gives me the ability to do that. And Gary asks, well, how do you know? How do you gauge success? You gauge success through surveys that are coming in after all these actions take place, after we implement a strategic plan, and then we revisit it and look at what real impacts are made from the people and getting input from the people that matter. And that is the rank and file within the law enforcement agency. It's within the command staff of the law enforcement agency. It's with our residents and citizens that we are here to serve and protect on a daily basis. And that is also bridging a relationship with my fellow directors and department heads within the city of Lacey, and knowing how my agency can be of a service to them to help their jobs be a much easier job to do. The chief of police is the most important job within a city manager's cabinet and that I work with every department to ensure that they achieve their goals within their respective departments, where that may not necessarily be the case on the other side of the coin. So in my mind, this is, I think, the most important thing. And it's really checking in and not just coming in just for the 6 months, but checking in at the 1 year mark, the 2 year mark, the 3 year mark, the 5 year mark, and really knowing and being able to gauge success based on all those things you placed in the mixing bowl to be successful as a chief. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And let's try to keep it to the 4 minutes. Next up, Robert Almeida, assuming you're selected as the next police chief for Lacey, what does your first 6 months look like? And what does success look like to you?
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. Well, we keep continuing what we're doing, frankly. We've had great success in filling our vacancies. When I started, we had numerous vacancies in their agency, over 20%. We hired 10 officers in the last year. We continue that. In our hiring profile, we make sure that we have a good diverse mix that's reflective of the community. So far, we've got 30% female. We've got half our non-white males. So we really keep building our diversity. We look at continuing to build leadership in the department, such as we implemented a new corporal rank. We continue with the development of our corporals as they develop their leadership skills. We continue to strive to deal with the problems that we've been dealing with now, such as homelessness, which is a significant issue now in Lacey. With that, I'll be presenting to the General Government Committee next Tuesday about a mobile outreach team concept that we'd like to implement. So we're going to keep going with initiatives that we've already started and building on those successes. We were accredited this past year. We've maintained our accreditation ever since we started back in the late 90s. So we're building on those levels of success, maintaining our accreditation, being the only accredited agency in Thurston County, and being that benchmark of professionalism, implementing the pillars of 21st century policing and constitutional policing, maintaining that level of professionalism. We talk about our training. We make sure our officers are the best trained in de-escalation, crisis intervention training, tactics, and everything else, all those personal skills it means to be a police officer. But you also build in ethics into all of our training. We continue to do that in the next 6 months and frankly, forever, because ethics is so important in what we do. It's not just can you do something, but should you do it? Is it the right thing to do? So as you keep building on those successes, I keep meeting with the members of the department like I do now. I meet with every single shift and business unit in the department on their schedule, not mine. So I flex my schedule to meet with them when they're working. Which means the graveyard shift starts, that's when I meet with them at their roll call. We did it on Zoom during the pandemic. We're starting to get back to roll calls, so I'm very looking forward to doing that in person because I think in person is much more personable, if you would. But when you're COVID, you got to do certain things. So in outreach to the community, I've had several Zooms with the community on a variety of topics. I met with the business leaders about homelessness and talking about some of the challenges we were facing there and how we've been developing strategies to mitigate some of the homeless issues and start to reduce those populations by finding them solutions in transitional housing and coordinated entry to different social service programs. We keep building on outreach when every opportunity frankly presents itself. Yesterday was a flag ceremony, meeting with the members of the community and our active and retired military members. The military is a big component of the Lacey community, and every opportunity you have to engage with them is a powerful opportunity to tell them what their police department can do and what they need from their police department. Also, frankly, our marginalized groups need to have outreach. I recently met with the Olympic Chinese Association and to talk to them about the needs about marginalized Asian families and how they were feeling marginalized, frankly, and put upon. I want to know what their police department was going to do about it. And so we have a good dialogue talking about how we really embrace their needs and how we could help them and give them really useful suggestions on how we could be more interactive. And we've built on that. So we continue on those advances that we've done. On technology, we've modernized our patrol fleet over the past year. And now we've started to put a new technology into those vehicles. We're getting new laptops for all our officers to make them more proficient. And that program's kicking off this month. So we keep over the next 6 months, it'll start to roll out. We're increasing our data ports and data point entry so people can log in easier. keep building that technology. We have a new radio system coming online here in Thurston County, and we build on that project. I'm part of that project. I'm still part of a variety of different both regional and nationwide projects on racial equity and making sure that we are serving all populations equally and providing that level of service that they require. So in short, transparent, verbal, present leadership that's stable and continues throughout the duration. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, the second question, we're going to start with Sean Case. Sean, homelessness is a national problem. Lacey's not immune to this issue. First, tell us what you think are the root causes of homelessness. And then second, what role should the police play in addressing homeless issues? And lastly, what innovative programs or initiatives have you been a part of?
The root cause of homelessness, it's complex. Access to housing, affordable housing, access to medical care, access to transportation. Those suffering from they're suffering from crisis, those that are involved in drug misuse. All of these are contributing factors to homelessness. And as I mentioned, all those. It's not a police standalone problem. It's a problem that's going to require not just the police department and not just the rest of the city of Lacey, but also nonprofits have to be involved in this as well. There are community members that can also play a role in homelessness. Homelessness is not a crime. They may get involved in criminal activity, but it's not a crime. And so using police resources as a standalone to deal with homelessness is simply not a viable option because of the fact that it's not a crime. Now, law enforcement has to play a pretty significant role. And the reason is because we come in contact with those individuals that are homeless on a regular basis. In fact, we're probably the one government entity that comes in contact the most with those that are homeless. And so we have to know what resources are available to us within the community. I'm a real big supporter of coordinated community response when it comes to homeless. The officers need to be aware, where can we take someone that's homeless when they're in various stages of either crisis or a need? Is there housing that's available? Is there shelter that's available? Is this a mental health issue that we can get them to do a warm handoff to a resource? What does the city have available? Right now in Anchorage, what we have been exploring for quite some time, and I've had great pleasure of being a part of it from the foundation several years ago, is a model called Crisis Now. And for law enforcement, that's a no wrong door approach. And when we come in contact with somebody on the street that needs help, we can take them to a location where we're in and out of the door in 5 minutes. It's not a long and complicated process. It makes the interaction with law enforcement very pleasant. We're taking them to a place that's a pleasant place to go and a humane place to go, not a dirty place that nobody wants to go. And when they're there, they've got about 23 hours where they're going to be assessed and they're going to be introduced to people that can help them navigate the system. And it may be that they're in mental health crisis. It may be that there's a chemical dependency that's involved. Some people actually don't want to leave the homeless environment. And we see that in law enforcement, which is difficult for some people to understand, but we see that. Not everybody needs the same level of care, the same level of response from the police department and the community. And having that resource available for law enforcement really puts the people that can actively be involved in the homeless problem right at the forefront. The other thing that I've been involved with here in Anchorage is criminal mental health diversion. We have people that are living on the streets that commit low-level crime. That is, it's a nuisance for our community. Our community doesn't like to be victimized from theft at businesses and stores. But at the same time, some of the individuals that commit those crimes, proper place for them probably isn't in a jail cell. And so taking the ability to divert them out of the criminal justice system where we can prevent recidivism is a better option. It's a cheaper option. It's a more efficient option. And in the end, what we find is that our victims actually like that a lot better. So, if there's one thing about me, when we look at some of these problems, innovation is really important to me. We have to look at different ways of doing business. We can't do business the old way. Right now, the officers that we're hiring, they're not the cops that we hired 20 or 30 years ago. They want to be involved in the solution. And the solution always isn't handcuffs and take them to jail. Now, don't get me wrong. When the circumstances are right, we'll continue to do that. But there's a lot of situations when the circumstance is not right. And our officers feed off that ability to have multiple options to deal with a very complicated and complex problem like homeless.
Thanks, Sean. Mr. Pate, same question. Homeless is a national problem. Lacey is not immune to this issue. Tell us what you think the root causes of homelessness are, and what role should the police play in addressing homeless issues, and what innovative programs have you been a part of?
First, homelessness is a law enforcement related issue. Police officers are social workers, they're counselors, there are individuals that are on the front lines that interact with this group of individuals on a daily basis. If you look at individuals that are placed in the county justice system, most of those individuals are homeless, especially for low-level offenses. I spoke on reimagining policing, and how do we reimagine policing? We reimagine policing by putting those entities that mean the most to that group of people in our police departments. And that is developing a program where we have a social worker that is actually an employee of the police department that can assist in getting social service programs to this group in the most expeditious way possible. And I think that is significant in order to address it. You look at and do research in regards to homelessness in the I-5 corridor that's right next to Lacey. And, this is an issue that is alive and well, that affects the residents and the stakeholders of the city of Lacey. And in my thought process, I think developing programs where we bring in social service partners to work with our social worker that is a member and employee of our law enforcement agency and develop programs and planning for that group, I think is very important, as well as other groups. Again, the key is reimagining policing, putting the right people in the right place at the right time to address these issues and really get a grasp of the matter. Low-level offenders are individuals that are most likely or more likely than not are homeless. City of Chicago ran into the same situation where they have tent cities in most places of the city for homeless people to live at. That is an actual authorized place of refuge because the city does not or did not know what to do with homelessness. If you look up tent cities and you Google the word, you see that in various different places across the country. The key is our law enforcement officers knowing when it is a law enforcement matter to arrest on, or when do we get involved in getting these individuals to shelters, getting these individuals safely relocated, and number one, and first and foremost, developing programs to keep them out of the criminal justice system, programs that are spearheaded out of the city of Lacey. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, same question for Robert Almada. First, tell us what you think the root causes are of homelessness. And second, what role should the police play in addressing homeless issues? And last, what innovative programs or initiatives have you been involved in?
Great. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. Homelessness is an issue near and dear to my heart. I think that the causes are multifold. There are socioeconomic causes, people that for circumstances beyond their control fall into homelessness. There's folks that have untreated mental illness or addiction to various substances. They fall into homelessness. And then frankly, you have folks who choose homelessness to perpetuate a certain lifestyle or criminal activity. And there's these three main groups that I've found in my experience. When I worked undercover, I was a homeless guy undercover, and I would go into the homeless community, and it really helped me develop an empathy for the homeless, to realize that this was a group of folks just like everybody else, and there were good folks and there were bad folks and everything in between. And it helped me develop the nuanced approach to this particular issue. Now, I think that, here in Lacey, we have some unique issues. We started seeing homeless camps begin on the off-ramps and on the buffer zones. And that's technically state property. We didn't have the authority or the jurisdiction to do anything about it. We do have anti-camping ordinances, but they weren't impactful in those areas. So we entered into an agreement with WSDOT to allow us to enforce no trespassing on that property. But under that agreement, we had to grandfather the folks that were there. So we went out, we introduced ourselves to those folks. We had established who was there. We did a survey. And then we started working with those individuals, building up trust over time through numerous contacts that were positive, providing them services. Here's a bottle of water. Can I get you in touch with somebody? Let's do some coordinated entry into social services, and working on finding those options. And my community resource unit, which are two officers, Officer Jimmy Williams and Justin Beltram, to go out and do this outreach. And they would have a service navigator with them to help work on coordinating those social services that we contracted through the Community Action Council. That's been very effective. We also started seeing a problem on Department of Ecology property, same issue. Again, state property. We had to enter into an agreement with them to give us jurisdiction to do the type of outreach we needed to do. And through that work, we've been able to cut those populations in half and get them successful outcomes out of that particular lifestyle. Now, I'm not going to tell you it's perfect, but we're working towards a solution, and that's one of the ways we've done it. So I think that's a good first step. Like I said, we've got a plan on the books to try mobile outreach teams, working with Olympia Recovery Services, and working on getting behavioral specialists to do casework so that it's not just a one-time interaction with these individuals, but it's actually ongoing casework, like some of the other candidates we're talking about, provide that substantive, ongoing service and frankly, high-touch contact so folks know we're just not going to go away. Now, when there are folks involved in criminal activity, definitely they need our attention because they're preying on the homeless population. They're victimizing the very people we're trying to help. There's people hiding in that group. So we go out and we identify the perpetrators of those type of crimes, and we do coordinated action, not just with CRU, not just two officers, but through all the different patrol shifts, so that there's a full court press. It's all synergistic to have a lasting impact on that individual. Realize they're not going to get away with victimizing the most vulnerable of our population. So I think we've been very clear on that message. I think as just to wrap up, I think it's all about building trust and working with the community and making sure they're informed and engaged as we move through this process to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to move to Jason Bullhorst. Kind of the same question. Homelessness is a national problem. Lacey's not immune from this issue. First, tell us what you think the root cause of homelessness. Second, what role should the police play in addressing homeless issues? And lastly, what innovative programs or initiatives have you been a part of?
And just like all the other candidates that have already expressed, homelessness doesn't occur from any one simple reason. It could be a host of issues that a person may find themselves, whether it's financial, just down on their luck, they lost their job, or they have a chemical dependence, as discussed earlier. There's just a whole host of problems. And quite frankly, I tell my three daughters all the time as they're entering into adulthood, nobody ever said life is easy. But the response to that is, it's not easy, but we can be resilient. And I think teaching and when we're dealing with homeless issues, having the humanistic approach to it and treat those individuals with humility, respect, and dignity, understanding that they're probably in crisis and they don't know how to come out of that. So just trying to understand and develop a relationship and a partnership with the homeless and find out what are their problems. Are they looking or searching for assistance to find a pathway out of where they're at? and they just don't know what else to do. So connecting, building that relationship, and then finding services. Police departments are always spearheading these operations because we're problem solvers. And we usually are the first ones to respond to any incident, and we get involved. We find solutions, and with homelessness specifically, if we can't solve the problem that homeless person is dealing with, then we find resources. We develop partnerships, and we want to be a solution. So some of the things that I've had the opportunity of experiencing, we have social workers that we've onboarded in my agency, and we again go out into the homeless community, identify who the population consists of, kind of why they're there, how they get there, what can we do to help, what kind of services and resources do we have at our disposal. City of Newport News just recently had a grant, and we established a large homeless shelter that it's a daytime center where the homeless community has a safe place to store their items, to clean, bathe, wash their clothes. And during the daytime hours, we can find some, leverage some assistance from the community to come in and trade or show some trade skills or other resources to the individuals that are either unemployed or underemployed and not able to find housing. So just developing future skills, like I said, with a resiliency to try to pick themselves up and learn new skills to better themselves. A lot of other strategies that we've incorporated, social service programs with our social workers. They've got all the resources. We have pamphlets. We just have all the numbers and contact information for different programs that our city offers, either at the local and or state level. Having a homeless advocacy group, people that want to help the homeless population, and they just do it out of the goodness of their heart. And just, again, treating everybody with humility and respect. That could be our kids out there, our family members. They matter, and we need to treat them as if they matter to us, and they do, because they are part of the community.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, for our next question, we're going to start with John Pate. John, some experts believe that policing will not look the same in 5 years. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? And if you agree, tell us why. If you disagree, tell us what policing will look like 5 years from now.
First, I do agree that law enforcement will not look the same as we know it in the next 5 years. In that we have had many instances that have occurred within the law enforcement community. Just something as recent as the George Floyd matter that occurred last year really put a focus on law enforcement and use of force throughout the country. And a lot of our cities were plagued with some type of demonstration, let it be peaceful or otherwise, based on that matter that occurred, as well as other police involved shootings that affected individuals of minority race within the nation. And saying that, and as always said during this forum, we have to reimagine policing as we know it, and that we want to make sure that we have programs in place to really address the elephant in the room that we're seeing all across the country within our law enforcement field. One part of it is having citizens review boards or citizens advisory boards to law enforcement within a specific municipal organization. I see law enforcement going in that route. Body cameras becoming a mandatory stopgap in ensuring that what occurs or what happens with it between law enforcement and the people that they or we interact with is captured in a way that is very open. And what you're seeing in law enforcement, when you're looking at talking about body camera footage, you're starting to see body camera footage being released within days of an officer use of force encounter compared to years of a law enforcement use of force encounter. So really being transparent in regards to how you run your agency is key. You see in some states where funding is tied to programming within a law enforcement agency, as far as being transparent and sharing internal affairs data with the public or a specific entity within the state that or jurisdiction that you work in. There are myriad different laws and case law and laws that the legislature is passing nationwide that's really addressing law enforcement in a way that law enforcement is being held accountable in many ways. So that's what you're going to see. So I want to lead a reimagining law enforcement task force upon becoming the chief of the Lacey Police Department, where we have input from our both our residents, our businesses, and national partners as far as law enforcement is concerned, and really coming together and really talking about what that looks like for the city of Lacey and what that looks like for the region. And that's a lot of, as a leader in law enforcement, it puts us outside our comfort zone. But as a leader that has worked in the area of police reform in most of the law enforcement agencies I work for, I am open to those ideas, and I'm open to developing relationships with everybody involved in the process, so we can make sure that the city of Lacey is in the forefront of reform in many ways. I want the City of Lacey Police Department to be placed in a magnifying glass within what to do as a law enforcement agency in the 21st century, and how we are reimagining law enforcement, and how law enforcement agencies can take our lead in how and really addressing this elephant in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, next up, Robert Almeida. Some experts believe policing will not look the same in 5 years. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? If you agree, tell us why. If you disagree, tell us what policing will look like 5 years from now.
Well, I definitely agree that policing is going to be different in 5 years, because frankly, over my 30-year career, it has constantly been in a state of change and flux. However, we're embracing that change now. For example, with the independent investigation teams that were mandated by Initiative 940, we've already initiated our community representatives on that panel. We made sure that it was a diverse group of folks that would oversee investigations involving the use of threatened use of deadly force. Of course, that investigation will be done by an outside agency, but it'll be attached to that outside agency whenever we use force. I think that the role of policing is going to be redefined. The current model of call 911, send a cop to the problem, he'll assess the problem, he or she will determine what resources are needed to go to that problem. That is going to be totally different now. We'll be meeting with TCOM, which is our 911 dispatch center here in town, and all the other law enforcement agencies in our region, because this isn't just a Lacey issue, this is a regional issue, in fact, a statewide issue of incorporating these new pieces of legislation into how to do business. And so dispatch will have to do a really good vetting of what type of response is required to go with this. Should it be a law enforcement response? Is it a crime problem? Is it a mental health problem? Do we need to get mental health resources out there? Is it a medical issue? Do we need to get medical issues out there? It's a different type of model of we'll just send the cops and they'll deal with it and they'll figure out what to bring. So it's a more nuanced, more sophisticated, more progressive model that we'll be looking towards. I think that certification is going to be a big part of police work moving forward. To be a police officer in the state of Washington, you need to be certified by the Criminal Justice Training Center. I think that's going to be heavily reviewed, and officers' conduct will be looked at both by CJTC and by various other entities to determine, make sure folks are following all the guidelines as necessary. I think technology will be a very large role moving forward, as it always has in law enforcement. I think body-worn cameras will be a big issue moving forward. I think that it'll help towards transparency. We've worked very hard towards transparency here in Lacey. I think we'll just keep moving on that path. That'll be further developed. I think that the use of technology to put tracking devices or some other type of means on a vehicle to prevent a pursuit. Frankly, you'll watch it through a tracker instead of actually chasing the vehicle. Again, ways to minimize liability and increase our effectiveness. But I think our purpose will still be the same. We're here to protect the community, and really the Lacey model of Lacey police officers are simply members of the community that happen to be wearing a police uniform. That will continue. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, Jason Bullhorst. Some experts believe that policing will not look the same in 5 years. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? If you agree, tell us why. If you disagree, tell us what policing will look like 5 years from now.
Quite frankly, I mean, if you look at policing holistically, the mission of any police department is to rid the community of crime, the potential for crime, keep a safe and unchaotic community. We're protectors, we're guardians. So that's not going to change. I think technology, some of the issues that we've seen across the nation, it has challenged us to get better at what we do. And by getting better, it's taking a critical look at ourselves. What are we doing? What are our policies? And what are our accountability standards? We've got to police ourselves as well. We are only there if we have the trust of the community. We can only do our job effectively. So to hold and keep the trust of the community is paramount. To do that, we have to be transparent. They have to find credibility in what we do daily. So what that means is it starts with who are we hiring? Are we hiring people with the talent to do police work? Do they have the right character? Do they have integrity? Do they have all the standards that we expect of our officers from day one? As they progress through the academy, somebody's character you can't train. Either they have it or they don't. And as a police officer, if you don't have integrity, you cannot do your job. So that's key to identify people of high integrity, high character. So that's day one with hiring. And then standards throughout their career. What we see nationwide are officers who have shown a history of problems that weren't held accountable for it. And it progressed to a point where there was just critical mass and it imploded. So what we need to do, everybody in law enforcement, we've heard the duty to intervene. If we see people making bad decisions, step up, like I discussed earlier with leadership, be the leader at the moment and do the right thing. If somebody's having a bad day and just getting ready to go sideways in a police action, step in and intervene and just do it professionally, but do the right thing. And again, that's even what policing is about, just doing the right thing. But with that accountability as the chief, we've got to keep our finger on the pulse of the agency. In Lacey, with 60 plus officers, knowing what's going on, who's having the problems and dealing with those, either through training, through counseling sessions, performance improvement plans when those are appropriate, as well as disciplinary matters. We've got to hold people accountable. And that goes all the way to my level as the chief. If I'm, I look at things that, we lease our positions at every level. Again, going back to the trust that we have to build with the community, by leasing the position, if my lease is paid for my actions, if my actions aren't appropriate, then I'm not going to hold that position that I'm leasing. We don't own it. So the community, gives us that position. So it all comes into accountability. Ultimately, the police chief has to hold everybody accountable for the standards that the community expects from its agency. So I think as we progress, having transparency with the community, involving them within our policies and how we hold each other accountable. The body-worn cameras, we've been using them for 8 years in Newport News. There's pros and cons, but I think the pros far outweigh the cons. But it all comes out to transparency and pushing out the story of what happened with the facts and just holding ourselves accountable.
Thank you, Jason. Sean Case, Some experts believe that policing will not look the same in 5 years. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? If you agree, tell us why. If you disagree, tell us what policing is going to look like 5 years from now.
How's this for an answer? Maybe. It really depends. For many of the things that have already been said, is technology going to advance? Yes. Are we going to change some laws and legislation? Yep, those things are going to happen. Are we going to learn from some of the mistakes? Maybe, maybe not. If you look at, I'm just going to read into the question a little bit more, and I'm going to back up to 2020 and look at some of the challenges we had in law enforcement. And I think that's what the question's getting at. So I'm going to dive into that aspect. This is not new. How many commissions have we had throughout this country? The Kerner Commission, Wickersham Commission, 21st Century Policing Report. We're going to see this again. We're going to see this in a year or 2 years. And it comes down to the same thing. We can change the date and the title, and it's going to apply today, and it's going to apply presumably in a couple of years if we go through the same steps that we've been going through in the past. So from that aspect, that's a concern of mine, is that potentially law enforcement isn't going to change as much as it needs to change in a year, 2 years, or 3 years. And what it really comes down to is it comes down to how we want to treat people, how we want to be engaged with our community. I mean, community policing, that term has been around for several decades now. And we're still talking about community policing like we just thought this up 2 years ago. And that's kind of like how we're going to overcome some of the hurdles we saw in 2020. I do a lot of training. And one of the questions I love to ask officers, no matter if it's day one in the academy, we just started an academy in Anchorage on Monday, or if you've been around for 20 years, why are you here? Why did you come to this profession when you started? And why are you sitting in the room, whatever training we're at for that particular day? And everybody gives me the same answer: to help people, to serve, to protect, to give back, to be a part of something bigger than myself. And then I ask, how's that working out for you? And they all tell me about that 5-year mark, things change. And they say things like, I realize that we're not even really helping anyone. Now, in a 20 to 25 to 30-year career, that's sad. That's a broken part of our system. We're not going to change the way we do policing unless within the walls of the police department, we can constantly remind our officers why they came to do this job. We're public servants. We're here to serve the public. And for us, sometimes we don't recognize minor contacts that we have with the public mean the world to them. And it can either be beneficial or it can really tear down relationships, overall attitudes and opinions towards the police. One single contact has the most influence on how people think and perceive the police. Do they trust the police? Even with social media, that's not the biggest influencer. And so as we move forward, the only way we're going to see changing in law enforcement, and you're going to see a significant difference in law enforcement, if we get back to why we're doing it. Sometimes it's not popular to take a 15-year officer and say, remember why you came here. You're public servants. You came to be a part of something bigger. This isn't about us. This is about the community that we serve. That's the passion that I bring when I come to policing. And that's the passion I want the officers who work for me to have every day when they get up. We look at some of our men and women of color and some of the complaints and the concerns that they have. And I look at my fellow officers and the responses that we've had throughout the country. It's been a lot of pushback, right? We've gotten our feelings hurt because we haven't liked some of the complaints and concerns about law enforcement. But what we need to do is we need to stop and we need to take the time and we need to open up our mind and our ears and we need to listen to what's being said because their perspective isn't wrong. Whether you look at it from a data perspective or you look at it from an emotional perspective, it's not wrong. And we have to change that we go about providing service because that's what we're here to do.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, we're moving on to question number 4, and we're going to start with Robert Almeida. Historically, policing has been a male-dominated profession that lacked diversity. It's important to Lacey for the police department personnel to reflect the community it serves. Please tell us about strategies you would use to recruit a diverse and inclusive workforce. And equally important, Once recruited and hired, how do you retain the staff?
This topic is near and dear to my heart. So like I talked about, we hired 10 commissioned officers and about half of our civilian positions this past year. And very happy to say that, like I said, 30% of those were female on the commission side, and all of them were female on the civilian side, as just so happens. And there was a good diverse mix racially. So, and also all the other things that count, experience base, where they grew up, what they experienced, what their life story is. It's a rich texture that we bring to the department. In order to do that, we do it a variety of ways, frankly. So we do public safety testing here in town or here in the region. I've gone out to the written test. I was the chief, I'm the only chief there. And I say, hey, here I am. I'm a Hispanic officer, I've had success in my career. You could be like me. You can come to Lacey and be successful. We're the most diverse law enforcement agency in Thurston County. We're very proud of that. And we're reflective of our community. And, and doing that personal outreach. I have my officers do that outreach. I have them bring their friends. They're all ambassadors of goodwill, talking about how great it is to work at the Lacey Police Department. I have a TAC officer at the Academy in Burien with the CJTC. He's always recruiting down there for folks that are coming through the Academy that show promise and have a good diverse outlook of things to attract them to the agency. We've picked up several officers that way. So we've been very good at recruiting a good diverse mix and making sure that when people come, they feel comfortable and they're set up for success. Every new recruit gets a mentor so that it's not just a brand new world they're walking into as a raw recruit, or even if they're laterals, so that they're brought into the agency and they know it's a family. We're here for your success, not for your failure. I'm a mentor. I'm here to help guide you and answer your questions. I'm not judging you. I'm not your FTO, right? So it's about being welcoming. It's about having the facilities here so that they're comfortable, adequate locker facilities, adequate equipment, making sure they know that they're important and their safety and their wellness is important, and reinforcing that message that helps retain folks. Then also making sure that you get rid of the mystery. You standardize processes. They know if you want to promote, this is the way you can promote. This is the process. It's standardized every single time so you know what to expect. You know what the qualifications are going to be, and we telegraph and we communicate when the processes are going to be. So the time isn't prepared when the announcement comes out. It's way now. It's right now. So we get people prepared for success as we move forward. We promoted, like I said, 6 corporals. Half of them are African American. It's pretty cool. It just happened out that way, but it's about promoting diversity in the organization and bringing folks for success, and developing and mentoring and giving folks the opportunity in your agency. And frankly, when there is conflict, in May with the death of George Floyd, we had a rough summer. A lot of our minority officers were really suffering, right? They were having that conflict of even their own family. How could you be an officer in this environment? And they were struggling with that. So we would have conversations and we would talk about those difficulties and what they were struggling with, and really help talk so that we could understand both their perspective and the community's perspective. So it's really important to make sure you have open lines of communication, a good wellness plan in place, and making sure that folks feel comfortable to succeed in the agency and to be at the agency.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, same question for Jason Ballhorst. Jason, historically, policing has been a male-dominated profession that lacked diversity. It's important to Lacey that the police department personnel reflect the community it serves. Please tell us about strategies you would use to recruit a diverse and inclusive workforce, and equally important, once recruited and hired, how do you retain the staff?
Right. Again, any organization to be successful, you've got to have a good open line communication between the agency and the community. To develop that, it's imperative that we can communicate with everybody and we can have those human connections with one another. So having people of like culture, like mindsets, it's important to have that within the agency of Lacey Police Department. So to build that, you've got to start by building a very productive and efficient, effective recruiting program led with talented people in that endeavor. That's giving them the training, whatever skills they need to brush up on searching for the right talent to bring into the police department. So just recruiting efforts, there is no magic trick to identifying the talent. It isn't mass produced out there. You've got to be very specific with the type of people you want to hire. Again, we do look at diversity because we want to be reflective of the community that we serve, so we can build those relationships and have that culture and communication gap overcome. So building the right team, looking at how we recruit, getting outbound, and looking at every opportunity, thinking outside the box, just putting together that team that can do that. And then as we bring people in, we measure their success rate. And as far as recruiting, did the objectives that we put into place work, and keep doing that loop on checking back to see where we can improve or get better at what we're doing. Retention, that's always an issue with every agency, especially today more than ever. It's very difficult out there. But again, hiring the right people, knowing why we want them to come on board with Lacey Police Department is important. They know what we stand for. We know that we put the community first and that we're here to serve. And law enforcement, it's a sacred career field, and it's difficult. It's very difficult. So just understanding that we value people, we value our people. They're important. Without the right people doing police work, the agency can't be successful. So you have to take care of your people. You got to let them know they matter. You got to help them develop successes through their career by giving them training opportunities, coaching, mentoring at every level, and just facilitating a plan for them for self-improvement within their career and personally. Again, everybody has a family. It's not always work with police. So we have to have our thumb on that pulse as well to make sure that we're taking care of them, and that when they're at home, they're in good hands, their wellness matters. We care about them and their family. So taking care of one of each other, and making sure that we track and have like a CIT program or EAP programs available for those who are struggling, or we detect may have some issues that we can step in and help. So just come in with a holistic approach, a family approach, and that our people truly matter to us.
Thank you, Jason. Sean Case, same question. Historically, policing has been a male-dominated profession. They lack diversity. It's important to Lacey for the police department personnel to reflect the community it serves. Please tell us about strategies you would use to recruit a diverse and inclusive workforce. And equally important, once recruited and hired, how do you retain staff?
I think the first thing that's important to recognize is representation does matter. Recently here in Anchorage, we named our first African-American chief that Anchorage has ever had in 100 years. And what I found moving to me was how moved the new chief was when he had so many contacts with the community that told him how important it was to see him and to see our first African-American chief that we ever had. That's important. That's a piece of recruiting, is having people in positions so that men and women of color and women can look and see people that are like them, that look like them, that have some of the same experiences they have had being successful in law enforcement. When we talk about what kind of innovative ways can we come up with when we're looking at diversifying law enforcement. Prior to COVID, we had here in Anchorage, we set up we were going to have a forum, if you will, with women in the police department, all ranks, sworn positions, non-sworn positions, and we're going to team up with outside resources, YWCA, Girl Scouts, and bring women in from the community that had some interest in law enforcement. Maybe some of them didn't even know exactly what they wanted to do, so they could interact and they could ask questions. We need to recognize that, like, if you're a female and you have a question about, hey, what happens if I'm in field training and I get pregnant? It's a heck of a lot easier to ask that to somebody who has experienced that versus, a male that's on the recruiting team. Currently, backgrounds of recruiting falls underneath me. And our last academy was the most diverse academy that we've ever had with the Anchorage Police Department. And when we look at some of the things that we try to do to increase that diversity, you know, we didn't change scores, we didn't change standards. Really what we focused on is being mindful of the way that we interact and we communicate with men and women of color, recognizing that their life experiences may be different than ours, and words that we say, things that we do when we interact with them might not be taken the same way that we take it, and being very aware of that. It wasn't some big, you know, initiative that we came up with. It was first, let's go back to how we treat people. And we were very successful. We just started another academy on Monday. It's one of the most diverse academies that we ever had. So it appears that we seem to be working. But we're also looking at other things like, let's look at the testing environment. What does it look like, you know, when you have 40 white males show up to testing and you have one person of color and one female in that testing room? How does that impact that environment, the way that they test? We all know that we have stress when we test. Does that negatively impact the way that they perform on that test? And should we look at that? These are the things that we need to think about, because a fair process, a process that's exactly the same for everybody, doesn't necessarily mean it's an equitable process. Right now, if you look at Lacey's numbers, their department is pretty close to representative of the community. Certainly far better than most agencies in the country. But this is not a numbers game. This is not a numbers issue. This is an infinite game. Like, we don't get to a point and then say we won, sigh of relief, and we can now move on. This is something that we continuously have to pursue. We want difference of thought. We want difference of background. Those things in the police department, that's what causes us to grow. That's what creates innovation. And those are some of the things that we need to constantly be looking at and measuring. You know, how often as a police agency do we pull our men and women of color aside and really get to have a real conversation and go, how has this department impacted you? What are some negative and positive impacts? What are some things that you think may be beneficial to, say, your family member or a friend or people that you know that would come out and apply for the police department? Another thing that we can do to try to recruit a diverse workforce is think about our university systems, specifically collegiate athletes. They come from all over the world to play sports. We know when they're going to graduate, and a lot of them aren't quite sure what they're going to do when they get done. It's a great ground to look at a wide, diverse group of people. In terms of how do we keep that diverse population when we bring them into the police department, is their view, their perspective, it matters. We put them in positions where they get to have influence. We put them in position where they get to have a voice. And that's what makes a comfortable environment. You know, one of the things that makes the environment so difficult in law enforcement isn't necessarily the calls for service that we go to. It isn't the things that we see out on the street. It's the environment that we create within the law enforcement agency. We completely control that environment. The way we treat our employees, right? You know, the police department, although it's a paramilitary organization, it's a bureaucracy. We don't have to create that sterile, cold environment within the walls of the police department. If we do, our employees go out and that's the way they interact and behave with the public. And that's not going to help us with recruiting. We need to also create a fun environment. That sounds a little weird to say in law enforcement, but no matter what your age, over and over again, we know that employees like to work in an environment that's fun, right? You don't want to get up and go to work and be bored, be not listened to, have fear that you're going to be investigated constantly for every little thing you do, and you want to have input and ownership.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, Mr. Pate, same question. Historically, policing has been a male-dominated profession that lacked diversity. It's important to Lacey that the department reflect the community it serves. Please tell us about strategies you would use to recruit a diverse and inclusive workforce. And equally as important, once recruited and hired, how do you retain staff?
Thank you, Gary, for that question. First, I would have to be remiss to say you really, when you're looking at the subject, you really have to look in the area of implicit bias. Because implicit bias truly drives the recruitment arm of any law enforcement agency, from its highest ranks all the way to the lowest level officer. In saying that, I think it's important that a targeted strategic plan is developed to address bringing individuals into the law enforcement agency that meets and looks like the individuals that we serve and protect on a daily basis. I think that's profoundly the most important thing that we need to look at as an agency. First, implicit bias. Secondly, is a targeted strategic plan, and looking at diversified recruitment. Let it be females, let it be individuals of Black and brown color within the law enforcement agency. Looking at religion, that we always focus on race, but we don't look at religion, the religious backgrounds of individuals within our community, and making sure that those backgrounds are serviced by looking at the rank and file that we look at in recruiting. One thing that anyone cannot tell me, I am a African-American male in an environment that really do not address recruitment nationwide. If you were to look at law enforcement nationwide in a bubble and really look at that, diversity is not and has not been the name of the game. It needs to be the name of the game, though. If we're going to be able to properly ensure that the residents and the business owners of the City of Lacey are properly representative in all ways. And again, religion counts too. People's religious beliefs count. And saying that, I would create a program to ensure that when we are recruiting for law enforcement, that we're going out to colleges, we're going out to those various communities of color to do targeted recruitment, to promote our exams when they come out and when they're out in the forefront, but also targeted recruitment when we're talking about religion. And honestly, how do we look at the success of this? And how do we know about the achievement? That's just ensuring that the makeup of the department is addressed in a way that we know that we try our very best to ensure recruitment is done in a way that's fair, in a way that's equitable, in every way possible, especially when we're reimagining law enforcement. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Nobody can tell me how it feels to grow up in a predominantly African-American community that's faced and plagued by law and order related issues. More specifically, the South Side of the city of Chicago. No one can here can tell me how it feels to be a police officer while being African-American, or be a chief of police that's African-American, and knowing the difficulties that I face as a leader to ensure that diversity is met on all aspects in all areas of the agency. So in saying that, I think the best way to look at this is do targeted recruitment, do a strategic plan. Let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's put something in writing that it is representative of the residents and business owners of the City of Lacey. And let's do a strategic plan that they get to review, that they get to look at, that they get to give their voice, their opinion on, in order to move the city to the next level. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, we're going to move on to our last question, and we're going to start with Jason Bullhorst. Jason, excessive use of force by police officers is a national and local concern that disproportionately impacts vulnerable populations, including those in crisis and people of color. How do you address this issue?
Having strong use of force policies begins with proper training, accountability for your standards and what's expected. Looking at the national trend and what's made media attention, we can focus on what is the perceived problems with use of force, but it all comes down to what the officers are doing and have they been held accountable throughout their career. So looking at some of the problems that were involved with George Floyd's case, the officer involved had a history of perceived issues that wasn't just overnight. It didn't develop, and there were supervisors along the path that were fully aware of those issues. So nobody ever did anything about it. You couldn't tell me that they had done something about it because he wouldn't have been operating as a police officer years after. So holding our personnel accountable for issues that are outside the scope of our expectations. So specifically with use of force, go back to the keeping everybody and treating everybody with humility and respect. We're all humans. We see people in law enforcement. We service people in law enforcement, sometimes at the worst points of their life. They're in crisis. They might be having a mental issues or some challenges with medication or addictions. But quite frankly, we got to treat them with humility and respect. We have our policies, we have standards. We only use that force which is reasonably necessary to effect the arrest or to protect somebody else's from injury or harm. So it's critical that we stand on that standard and hold each other accountable. And as I discussed earlier, we have the intervention procedures in place where if we have an officer that sees something going wrong, it's okay for us to step in, even if it's a junior officer stepping in on a supervisor. It's got to happen. We got to hold that standard, and we have to expect that from one another. And as the chief of police coming in, I've got to review everybody's personnel records, identify with our internal affairs if we have a pattern developing, and step in immediately to correct that. And if we can't correct those actions where somebody's going outside the scope of what's expected, we have to have formal disciplinary action taken. Obviously we're going to do that in a progressive manner, but we've got to have employees doing the right thing out there on the street.
Thank you, Jason. Sean Case. Hey, Sean. Excessive use of force by police officers is a national and local concern that disproportionately impacts vulnerable populations, including those in crisis and people of color. How do you address this issue?
There's a lot of things that we can look at when we talk about the disproportionate use of force against particularly men of color and those who are in crisis. We can look at CIT training. We can look at having a coordinated response where we have those that are mental health trained that are not cops to have responses with law enforcement. We can look at latest technologies, less lethal technologies, so that we can use less force to try to accomplish the mission. We can talk about policies that are based on the Fourth Amendment and constitutionally based policies. We can talk about training and more training. And we can talk about training again. We can talk about scenario-based training and all the things that we've been doing. We've been talking about these things for a long period of time. Nothing I just said is new. Nothing I just said is on the horizon that is some crazy innovative idea. What this really comes down to, this is a chief problem. This is a chief problem. When you have an officer that uses force, any kind of force, above simple handcuffing or a simple escorting from one position to the other, that force has to be documented. If that force rises to the level of a strike, use of an intermediate tool, there's an injury, there's a complaint, things that I would call more of a significant use of force, that has to be reviewed by a supervisor in the chain of command. There's just no two ways about that. That force has to be looked at. The supervisor and supervisory staff and command staff has to be properly trained in analyzing and looking at that use of force. we see over and over again. I mean, just in the previous answer, we heard people that have used, or officers that have used excessive force. We knew this happened. Okay, well, if we knew this happened, why didn't we do something about it? And ultimately that rests with the chief of police. We have to have good, adequate investigations. And once we get to the conclusion of that investigation, we have to take appropriate disciplinary and corrective action. Sometimes it's discipline, sometimes it's long-term discipline, sometimes it's termination, sometimes it's training. We also have to look at those investigations, those use of force, from a training standpoint at the beginning of the academy. Was the training in the academy that the officer received actually adequate for the job that we want them to do today? We can't come down on our officers when they do what we ask them to do, and then later on we find out we didn't want them to do that, use force that way. That's our problem. Again, it's a chief problem. We have to take the corrective measure and make sure they're getting the proper information and the proper training. We have to talk about these incidents from a very real standpoint. When you talk about people that are in mental health crisis, CIT training has been going on in the Nashville model for decades, not a new concept. And so we are familiar with the idea of how do we communicate voice tones, how we stand, how close we get, things we shouldn't say, things we should say when we're dealing with someone in mental health crisis. But yet time and time again, what becomes more of the priority? The priority becomes, it's all about officer safety, and we got raised voice tones, we got too close, we got, we're involved in this mental mindset of officer safety. Now, I'm not saying that our officers should put themselves in harm's way at all. So don't understand that message. What I am saying is we need to ensure as chiefs that if we provide the training to the officers on the street, we need to make sure that they're actually following through with that. And it's not just use of force. It's prior to that use of force. It is the conversation, the communication, the interaction with the family member who called in the person in crisis. It's the community that has seen a high rates of use of force with law enforcement among those that are living in poverty and those men and women of color. How do we go into those? What are the tactics and the skills that we use as we roll into that so that we can prevent the use of force prior to us getting there? You have 3 officers on scene, and it's been shown over and over again, the likelihood of using force significantly decreases because you have contact cover, you can use better skills and tactics, you can dedicate someone to communication and not have to worry about constantly thinking about safety because an officer's there to take care of that piece for them. So it is a problem, and it rests with the chief of police, and that's how it gets fixed.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, John Pate, same question. Excessive force by police officers is a national and local concern that disproportionately impacts vulnerable populations, including those in crisis and people of color. How do you address that issue?
Well, first, the first issue at hand is really looking at implicit bias within your law enforcement agency and ensuring that your officers know what their implicit bias is with that group or entity or a group of individual, such as our African American, Black and Brown population, such as individuals that are in crisis, and really drilling down to the lowest level so they understand what their implicit bias is towards those groups of individuals. So they're more cognizant of their thought process, their actions, and their interactions with those individuals. That's one part of it. Another part of it is developing policy and procedures, more specifically use of force policy and procedure that deals with and speaks of sanctity of life. Trying to prevent those that we interact with from losing their life due to any action that may occur where it will cause a violent use of force encounter to occur where that person will lose their life. And that is something that has been discussed over the last 2 or 3 years within law enforcement, within the city of Chicago and various other law enforcement agencies in this country. So really looking at our policies and procedures and looking what is the responsibility of our supervisors that supervise these officers that run into these situations in regards to use of force. For a long time, when I did investigations on law enforcement, and while the Cook County Sheriff's Office was under a consent decree, we saw that officers are being held accountable, but not their supervisors. Placing within a policy that if there's body cam video available, that officer has to review that body camera video, as well as the supervisor review their body camera video. What happens when a supervisor reviews body camera video and it's something that is excessive, force that's excessive in nature, that supervisor has a responsibility to report their use of force action, or what is a alleged appearance of an excessive use of force. So we look at those areas. We look at trying to win the minds, hearts, and souls of our community, the community that we serve, and ensuring that they understand what our purpose is within the community. And that is to protect and serve all individuals. And that is individuals that are breaking the law, as well as individuals that we serve as residents and business owners. Civil rights and protecting civil rights of individuals that our law enforcement agency has interactions with in a way that they are being placed in the criminal justice system.
You got 1 minute,
Procedural
John.
adjustments.
You got
So
1
we
minute.
look at, so those are things we need to look at that I think is very, very much important. And CIT is a very important subject when we look at our individuals that are under crisis as well. So it's just not a use of force issue. It is a holistic issue that needs to be addressed one day at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And the question is going to go, next question is going to go to, actually same question, to Robert Almeida. Robert, excessive use of force by police officers is a national and local concern that disproportionately impacts vulnerable populations, including those in crisis and people of color. How would you address this issue?
I agree with everything that's been said. First of all, I agree with my colleagues on this panel to just kind of reinforce some of the issues. I think that absolutely starts with understanding it's not us versus them. This is a we. We are part of the community, right? We are not an occupying force. So we start with that mindset. And we talk about the history of policing. We talk about how it's affected, race and equity issues. There's a new program coming on from CJTC, headlined by our Officer Westfall at the Academy, and he'll be bringing that back to our department as one of the beta groups to test this new statewide training class out on. And there's a lot of other ways to show implicit bias training and to develop the sensitivity and sympathy. One of the things we'll be doing now that COVID is lessening, we'll be going to the Holocaust Museum in Seattle to talk about how empathy and how treating people with equity is so important. I think that it starts with strong policy, like has been said, that's clear, is not 25 pages, but is understandable by the line level officer who can apply that policy in a clear way. You train them, you testify, you would do verified testing with the officer, you do scenario-based training, crisis intervention training, you do de-escalation training, all those things we've been discussing. I think it's really important that people understand they have a duty to intervene at all levels. I can tell you a real good example of that was before an officer went to the academy, he was working as a temporary community service officer. He was paired with another service officer with a prisoner at the hospital. The newer community service officer wasn't talking to the prisoner as well as we would have liked. And the CSO took that person aside and said, listen, it's not how we talk to people here. That's not the Lacey way. We treat everybody with respect. And instantly that new guy knew that's not acceptable. And he had to toe the line. The fact that a civilian employee knew that this guy was going to be a commissioned officer, but felt empowered and a duty to correct that situation is so important and so ingrained into the culture of the Lacey Police Department. I think that when you do have a use of force, which frankly is rather rare here, we only had what was described as a significant level of force. We had 11 of those last year, frankly, which is great, but 0 would be better. And how do we achieve that? It's by looking at how do we get to here? How was the use of force used? Did we document that use of force? And I agree, everything beyond simple handcuffing and a control technique that is documented. Then is reviewed by a supervisor. Then it's reviewed by a use of force expert. Then it's reviewed through the chain of command and finally signed off by the chief of police. It is a comprehensive and robust review system to make sure that we are following our policy and doing everything possible to not use force. If we do use force, make sure it is appropriate. And then frankly, we report to the community. We tally all the information and we are transparent. And we said, this is the use of force we used and this is why we used it and why we thought it was appropriate or not appropriate. And we took what accountability measures we took to correct the condition. And then I also think you get what you reward. One of the main things I thought was important that we recognize and award officers who de-escalate violent confrontations. We gave out 3 awards last year for, frankly, situations that could have turned tragic had not the officers stepped back, brought resources to the scene, and used de-escalation techniques to have a positive outcome. So I think you get what you reward. Also, you make sure that you get positive reinforcement officers continually when you see good work. The same as giving corrective action when you see things that aren't what you want to see, especially on use of force issues. And I think supervision was pointed out, which I think is extremely important. When we implemented the corporal rank, we doubled the amount of supervision in patrol. Vitally important so that the officer knows, one, he's got supervisor on scene, provided sufficient resources and give them the backing they need, but also provide that level of oversight from a trained supervisor who has the understanding of all the issues beyond an officer who's engaged in an incident. So I think in totality, that's how you address these issues and help reduce incidents of force and reduce the amount of force used. Make sure it's proportional to the incident.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. I appreciate your response, and I appreciate all the responses that we heard tonight from the candidates. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to our city manager, Scott Spence.
Thank you, Gary. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and especially I want to thank our candidates for participating in tonight's community forum. Obviously, this is an important step in our selection of Lacey's next police chief. Our next phase are going to be a multi-panel interview process that we'll be conducting tomorrow virtually, and all candidates will be participating in that. And our goal is to get to 1 or 2 final candidates, and then at some point we'll be able to provide a conditional offer and then go through a conditional go through an extensive background process. We do want to hear from your feedback. If you have any individual comments or insights after watching tonight's forum, I encourage you to reach out to me directly. I can be called at 360-438-269. You should have my contact information here on the screen. We'll also leave this up as we close out tonight's forum. Again, thank you for this community engagement for this very important position with the City of Lacey. This concludes our community forum, and thank you again, and have a good night.